The worst feeling isn't realizing you are being used. It is realizing they are laughing at you for loving them enough to let it happen. I did not find the truth through a private investigator. I found it through a pocket dial on a Tuesday night. I answered expecting a crisis, but instead, I heard my sister's voice over the clink of expensive wine glasses, joking that I was nothing more than a breathing bank account. My name is Faith Crawford, and until 40 minutes ago, I believed that love was a transaction where I paid the cost and my family reaped the benefits. I was sitting in my corner office in uptown Charlotte, staring at the panoramic view of the city lights that blurred against the glass. It was nearly 10 at night. The cleaning crew had already vacuumed the hallway twice, the hum of their industrial machines the only company I had kept for the last 3 hours. My coffee was stone cold, a stagnant pool of brown sludge in a mug that said, "World's okayest sister." A gift Brielle had given me 5 years ago when she needed $3,000 for a cosmetology course she never finished. I rubbed my temples, trying to massage away the headache that had been throbbing behind my eyes since noon. On the dual monitors in front of me, complex financial models for a merger acquisition danced with personal spreadsheets I kept hidden in a separate tab. My corporate work was impeccable. My personal finances, however, were a tragedy of self-sacrifice. I made a salary that should have afforded me a sprawling house in Dilworth or a luxury condo right here in the city center. Instead, I drove a sedan with a dented bumper and lived in a studio apartment on the edge of town that smelled permanently of my neighbor's boiled cabbage. I lived small so they could live large. That was the narrative I fed myself. It was the noble lie. My phone buzzed against the mahogany desk, the vibration rattling a loose pen. The screen lit up with a photo of my sister, Brielle. It was a selfie she had taken at a beach trip I had paid for last summer. My stomach gave an involuntary lurch. A call this late usually meant a crisis, a flat tire, a threat of eviction, a sudden medical emergency that required immediate cash transfer. I picked up the phone, my voice automatically softening into the soothing tone of the designated fixer. "Hey, Bri," I said, already reaching for my banking app with my other hand. "Is everything okay?" There was no answer. "Brielle?" I asked again, leaning forward in my ergonomic chair. "Are you there?" There was no panic on the other end. There was no sobbing. Instead, I heard the distinct ambient noise of a celebration. Jazz music played softly in the background, a saxophone melody that sounded live. I heard the clink of silverware against china and the heavy, crystal chime of a toast being made. It sounded expensive. It sounded like the kind of restaurant I never took myself to because I was too busy saving for Dustin's rent. I was about to hang up, assuming it was a pocket dial, when I heard a voice cut through the background noise. It was Brielle, but her voice lacked the whine she always used when speaking to me. She sounded vibrant. She sounded mocking. "Oh, put it away. Dustin," Brielle said, her voice dripping with amusement. "You know we are not paying for this. Faith is probably still at the office right now, grinding away just to make sure her little beneficiaries are comfortable." I froze. My finger hovered over the disconnect button, but my hand refused to move. The air in my office suddenly felt thin, as if the oxygen had been sucked out by the ventilation system. "She really is a bill-paying machine, isn't she?" A man's voice laughed. It was Dustin, my brother, who had told me 2 days ago that he was too depressed to look for work because the job market was crushing his spirit. He sounded remarkably spirited now. I told her my transmission was slipping. "The car is fine. But I wanted that new gaming setup." She transferred the money in 5 minutes, didn't even ask for a receipt. I stopped breathing. I sat there, a statue in a high-rise tower, listening to my siblings dissect my generosity like vultures picking at a carcass. I waited for my mother to step in. Marla was the matriarch. She was the one who told me I was the glue holding this family together. She was the one who cried on my shoulder about how hard it was to be a widow, how grateful she was that I had stepped up to be the head of the household. Then I heard her laugh. It was a dry, cackling sound that chilled me to the bone. "Let her work," Marla said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "What else does she have? She has no husband. She has no children. She is 32 years old and sleeps alone. What is she going to do with her money? Buy cats? The table erupted in laughter. It was a cruel, communal sound. They were bonding over my solitude. They were toasting to my loneliness. I am thinking of telling her the water company raised their rates again, Dustin said, his mouth sounding full of food. Maybe hike it up by 40%. She never checks the actual statements. She just pays whatever number I text her. Do it, Brielle urged. I need a new dress for that gala next week. Just tell her it is a surcharge for the winter storm or something. She is smart with stocks, but she is so stupid when it comes to us. Stupid. The word hung in the silence of my office. I looked at the spreadsheet on my screen. Line 42. Dustin. Utilities assistance. Line 43. Mom. Physical therapy. Line 44. Brielle. Emergency car repair. I had categorized these expenses under family support. I realize now I should have labeled them stupidity tax. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not yell into the phone to let them know I was there. I did something that terrified me with its coldness. I opened a blank document on my computer. I typed out the date. Then I typed out the exact words I had just heard. Faith is a bill-paying machine. She has no husband, no children. What else is she going to do with her money? Just tell her the water company raised rates. I transcribed their cruelty with the same precision I used for my quarterly reports. I captured the timestamps. I noted the tone of voice. I recorded the background noise. It was not just a diary entry, it was evidence. The call on the other end ended abruptly, likely because Brielle had finally noticed her phone was active. Or perhaps the battery had died. The silence that rushed back into my office was deafening. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. I looked tired. I looked worn out. I looked exactly like the woman they described, a woman who had hollowed herself out to keep them warm. But as I stared at my own eyes in the glass, something shifted. The exhaustion did not vanish, but it hardened. It calcified into something sharp and dangerous. I looked at the family budget spreadsheet one last time. For 4 years, I had treated them like dependents. I had treated them like people who loved me but were just down on their luck. I realize now that was a lie. They were not down on their luck. They were on my payroll. And as any good financial analyst knows, when an investment yields 0 returns and actively drains capital, there is only one logical move remaining. You liquidate the asset. I closed my laptop, packed my bag, and walked out of the office. I did not go home to my tiny apartment to cry into my pillow. I drove home in silence, the radio off, my mind racing with numbers, dates, and account passwords. They wanted a bill-paying machine? Fine. But they forgot that machines can be reprogrammed, and this machine was about to print out a receipt that would cost them everything they had taken for granted. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of red taillights and the rhythmic thumping of my own pulse in my ears. I did not turn on the radio. I could not bear the thought of noise filling the silence where my family's laughter still echoed. When I finally unlocked the door to my studio, the air inside was stale. It smelled of the laundry I had not had time to fold, and the solitude I had convinced myself was necessary for my career. I sat down on the edge of my bed, still in my blazer, and opened my personal laptop. The screen glowed white in the dark room, illuminating the sparse furniture I owned. For the first time in my life, I did not look at my bank account to see how much I could spare. I looked at it to see how much I had lost. My mind began to rewind, not by days, but by years. It was like watching a film reel spin backward, frame by agonizing frame, revealing a pattern so obvious that I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. I realized that their crises were never random. They were synchronized. Every single time I had shared a piece of good news, a promotion, a quarterly bonus, a tax refund, a calamity would strike the Crawford household within 48 hours. I thought back to 3 years ago. I had received a performance bonus of $5,000. I was ecstatic. I had planned to take a week off and go to a yoga retreat in Sedona. Something just for me. I remembered calling my mother, Marla, to tell her. I could hear the hesitation in her voice even then. 2 days later. She called me in tears. The roof was leaking. She said, there was mold. It was a health hazard. She coughed into the phone for dramatic effect. I canceled Sedona. I transferred $4,500 to her account the next morning. A week later, I saw the photos on Facebook. There was no construction crew at the house. There were no photos of a repaired ceiling. Instead, there was Marla, beaming at a high-end salon, her hair freshly dyed a rich, expensive auburn, sitting next to a new designer handbag that cost more than my first car. The caption read, "Treating myself because I deserve it." When I asked her about the roof, she told me they found a cheaper contractor and she used the rest for emotional recovery. I had let it slide. Then there was Brielle. Last autumn, she called me hyperventilating. She said she was short on her tuition for her graphic design program and that if she did not pay by Friday, she would be dropped from her classes. She needed $1,200. I was saving that money to fix the brakes on my sedan, which had been squealing for a month. But Brielle was my little sister. I could not let her fail. I paid the tuition. I drove on bad brakes for another 6 weeks, praying I would not rear-end anyone on the highway. The very next weekend, Brielle posted a story on Instagram. She was not studying. She was at a stadium, wearing a VIP lanyard around her neck, screaming along to a pop star in a floor seat that I knew cost at least $800. She was holding a $20 beer in one hand and a bag of merchandise in the other. I remembered staring at that phone screen, feeling a pinch of annoyance, but telling myself, she is young, she needs to have fun. I was not a sister to them. I was an insurance policy against their own poor decisions. I thought of Dustin. 6 months ago, he told me he had lost his job at the warehouse. He said he could not make rent. He said he was eating instant noodles and sleeping in his winter coat because he could not afford heat. I sent him $2,000 to cover 2 months of rent and utilities. I wanted him to be safe. 3 days later, during a FaceTime call, he hastily tried to kick a box out of the frame, but I saw it. It was a brand new virtual reality gaming system, the kind that had just been released. He saw me looking at it and said, "Oh, a friend loaned that to me." I sat there in the dark, scrolling through my transaction history. It was a graveyard of my own dreams, line after line of transfers. It was not just the big emergencies, it was the slow, steady bleed that I had ignored. The monthly transfer for the family cell phone plan, of which I paid the entirety despite using only one line, the car insurance for Marla, which I had been paying since Dad died, even though she worked a part-time job that could easily cover it, the Netflix account, the Spotify family plan, the Amazon Prime membership. I pulled up a calculator. I started adding the numbers. The water bill, which Dustin claimed fluctuated wildly, but upon closer inspection of my transfers, seemed to jump by exactly $100 every time I mentioned I had worked overtime. The short-term loans for groceries that never got repaid. The total at the bottom of the spreadsheet made my breath hitch. Over the last 4 years, I had transferred $72,000 to my family. $72,000. That was a down payment on a house. That was a master's degree. That was a wedding fund. That was my freedom. I realized then that the betrayal was not about the money. Money is a renewable resource. You can always earn more money. But trust? Trust is a non-renewable resource, and they had burned mine to keep themselves warm. They did not just steal my earnings. They stole the version of me that believed in them. They stole my ability to look at a phone call from my mother and feel love instead of anxiety. I looked at the phone sitting on the desk next to me. It felt heavy, like a loaded weapon. I needed to know one last thing. I needed to see if there was even a shred of conscience left in them, or if the rot had gone all the way to the bone. I unlocked the screen and opened my text thread with Brielle. I typed a message, keeping my fingers steady. "Hey, I saw a missed call from you earlier. Is everything okay? Did you need something?" I hit send. I watched the 3 little dots dance on the screen almost immediately. She was still on her phone. She was likely still at that table, laughing, perhaps taking a photo of her dessert. The reply came through 10 seconds later. "No, Everything is good. Must have been a pocket dial. We are just grabbing a quick dinner. Love you. Love you. The words looked alien on the screen. It was a lie wrapped in a platitude. She did not mention the restaurant. She did not mention who we were. She certainly did not mention the conversation about hiking up the water bill. She smoothed it over with a lie so casual it proved she had done this 1,000 times before. I did not reply. I did not throw the phone across the room. I placed it gently face down on the desk. The sadness that had been pooling in my chest for the last hour began to drain away, replaced by a cold, clinical clarity. I was a financial analyst. I fixed broken systems. I cut dead weight from portfolios to save the company. And right now, the company was me. I opened a new folder on my laptop. I did not name it family budget. I did not name it emergency fund. I typed 3 words that signaled the end of my life as their doormat. Exit strategy. Faith. I clicked save. The cursor blinked on the blank white page. Waiting for my first move. I cracked my knuckles. The sound sharp in the quiet room. If they wanted to play games with numbers, they were about to learn that they were playing against a grandmaster. I was done crying. It was time to start auditing. I transformed my kitchen table into a war room. The emotional devastation of the previous hour had crystallized into a cold, forensic determination. I was no longer a sister or a daughter. I was an auditor, and I was about to conduct the most ruthless examination of my life. I opened a new spreadsheet on my laptop. This was not the chaotic, guilt-ridden budget I used to manage. This was an indictment. I created headers with clinical precision: date of transfer, amount, recipient, stated purpose, and evidence of reality. I started with the recurring charges. I pulled up my credit card statements for the last 24 months and began to highlight every transaction that did not belong to me. It was death by 1,000 cuts. There was a premium streaming service subscription for $19.99 a month. I did not even own a television. There was a monthly charge for a high-end beauty box subscription delivered to Brielle's address. There was a recurring payment for a cloud storage plan that was linked to Dustin's email address. I had authorized none of these explicitly, but I had likely nodded along absent-mindedly during some chaotic family gathering when they asked to borrow my card for a one-time purchase. That one-time purchase had quietly morphed into a permanent subsidy. I calculated the total for just these invisible costs. It came out to nearly $300 a month. That was $3,600 a year. That was a vacation I never took. That was the emergency fund I was struggling to build. Then I dug deeper. I logged into my email and searched for security alerts I had previously archived without reading. My heart hammered against my ribs as I found an email from my bank dated 8 months ago. Subject: suspicious login attempt. The location of the attempt was the exact suburb where my mother lived. The device used was an iPhone 14 Pro. I looked at the date. It was 2 days after I had told my mother I could not afford to pay for her car repairs because I had my own medical bills. Someone had tried to brute force their way into my savings account. It was not a stranger. It was Dustin. I knew for a fact he had upgraded to that specific phone model that same week because he had bragged about the camera quality in our family group chat. They had not just asked for money. When I said no, they had tried to take it. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. This was not dependency. This was predation. I opened a new tab and did something I had not done in years. I logged into Instagram and Facebook. I usually avoided their profiles because seeing them happy while I worked 80-hour weeks made me feel guilty for not being there. Now, I looked at their profiles as a prosecutor looking for holes in an alibi. I started cross-referencing. On October 12th, I had transferred $600 to Marla. She had told me her refrigerator had died and she was losing all her food. She cried on the phone, saying she was eating spoiled yogurt. I scrolled to October 14th on her Facebook timeline. There was no photo of a new appliance. Instead, there was a check-in at a luxury spa 2 towns over. The photo showed her holding a glass of champagne with a freshly manicured hand. The caption read, "Sometimes you just have to spoil yourself because no one else will." The rage that flared in my chest was white hot, but I forced it down. I did not scream. I took a screenshot. I saved the image. I noted the timestamp. I moved to Brielle's profile. On December 3rd, she had texted me in a panic saying her landlord was threatening eviction if she did not come up with $800 immediately. I had wired the money within 10 minutes. On December 5th, Brielle posted a haul video on TikTok. She was unboxing a pair of designer boots and a limited edition makeup palette. She looked radiant. She looked well-rested. She told her followers, "Worked so hard for these babies." I felt sick. It wasn't that they were spending money. It was the storytelling. They had built an entire mythology around my gullibility. To them, I was not a person with needs or dreams. I was a resource to be mined until I was empty. I worked through the night. By 4 a.m, I had a dossier. It was 20 pages long. It contained screenshots, bank statements, text logs, and comparative timelines. I backed it up to the cloud. I saved a copy to an external hard drive. I printed a physical copy and locked it in my fireproof safe. The next morning, I did not go to my office immediately. I drove to a small coffee shop on the outskirts of the city to meet Nina. Nina was a senior risk manager at my firm. She was sharp, unsentimental, and the only person I knew who had successfully divorced her toxic family 5 years ago. I sat down opposite her, my eyes burning from lack of sleep, and slid a condensed version of my findings across the table. Nina read it in silence. She sipped her black coffee, her eyes scanning the columns of betrayal. When she finished, she did not offer me a pitying look. She did not tell me she was sorry. She looked at me with respect. "This is thorough," she said, tapping the paper. "You have them dead to rights."
"I want to block them," I said, my voice raspy. "I want to change my number, close my accounts, and vanish. I want to send this to them and never speak to them again." Nina shook her head slowly. "If you cut them off cold turkey today, they will explode."
"They will show up at your job. They will call the police and request a wellness check to embarrass you. They will spin a narrative that you are having a mental breakdown. You cannot just walk away from parasites. Faith, you have to detach them carefully, or they will take a chunk of your flesh with them." "So what do I do?" I asked. "You have a family dinner coming up this Sunday, right?" Nina asked. I nodded. "Marla reminded me 3 times. She said it is important." "Go," Nina said. Her eyes glinted with a strategic coldness. "Do not confront them yet. Do not scream. Go there and be the version of Faith they expect. But listen, let them get comfortable. Let them feel safe. People get sloppy when they think they have won. Let them ask for money one last time. Let them put the request on record." "Why?" "Because," Nina leaned in, lowering her voice, "the best way to destroy a liar is to let them lie when you already know the truth. You need one final, undeniable interaction where they show their hand while you are holding all the aces. You are not going there as a daughter. Faith, you are going there as an undercover agent." I looked down at the spreadsheet. Nina was right. If I sent a text now, they would gaslight me. They would say I was crazy. They would say the spa trip was a gift from a friend, or the boots were fake. They would spin the web tighter. But if I went there, if I looked them in the eye and let them deliver their performance, I would have the final piece of evidence I needed to close the case forever. "Okay," I said, taking the file back. "I will go." "Good," Nina said. "And Faith, keep your wallet in the car." I walked out of the coffee shop into the bright morning sun. The dread that usually accompanied the thought of Sunday dinner was gone. In its place was a strange, vibrating anticipation. I was going to walk into the lion's den. But this time, I was not the meat. I was the hunter. Sunday evening arrived with a humidity that made the air feel heavy and suffocating. A fitting atmosphere for what I was about to do. I pulled my sedan into the driveway of my mother's house in the suburbs of Charlotte. It was a nice house, a sprawling ranch-style build with a manicured lawn that cost $150 a month to maintain, a bill I paid directly to the landscaper. As I turned off the ignition, I looked at the facade. It looked respectable. It looked prosperous. It looked nothing like the home of a family that claimed they were on the brink of destitution every third Tuesday of the month. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I had applied concealer to hide the dark circles from my sleepless nights of auditing. I practiced my smile. It had to look tired, but willing. The smile of the martyr they expected me to be. I took a deep breath, stepped out of the car, and walked to the front door. I did not have to knock. Brielle threw the door open before I even reached the mat. "Faithy!" she squealed, throwing her arms around me. The embrace was suffocating. She smelled of vanilla and something sharper, more expensive. It was Santal 33, a perfume that retailed for over $200 a bottle. I knew this because I had wanted it for myself last Christmas, but decided it was too frivolous. Brielle squeezed me tight, her body warm and soft, shaking with an energy that felt less like affection and more like relief. The ATM had arrived. "Hi, Brie," I said, patting her back stiffly. "You smell nice." "Oh, this?" She pulled back, fluttering her eyelashes. "It is just a dupe I found at the drugstore. $5. Can you believe it?" I smiled. "Wow, that is a great find." I walked into the foyer. The house was cool, the air conditioning humming at a crisp 68 degrees. My mother, Marla, emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a floral apron. She looked the picture of maternal warmth, but I noticed her nails immediately. They were fresh acrylics, shaped into long almonds and painted a deep, glossy burgundy. A salon set like that cost at least $60, plus tip. "There she is," Marla cooed, opening her arms. "My rock, my provider. You look thin. Faith, have you been eating?" "Just busy at work, Mom," I said, accepting her hug. Her grip was firm, possessive. "Well, you are here now," she said, pulling away and cupping my face. "You are the pride of this family. You know that? I do not know what we would do without you." It was the script. I had heard these lines 1,000 times. Before, they made me feel seen. Now, they made me feel like an employee being managed. I walked past them into the living room and stopped. The room had changed. The old, sagging beige sofa was gone. In its place was a sectional in a chic charcoal velvet, laden with decorative pillows. And on the wall, mounted with professional brackets, was a television that looked larger than the windshield of my car. It had to be at least 75 inches. The colors on the screen were hyper-realistic, displaying a cooking show in 4K resolution. "Wow," I said, letting my jaw drop slightly. "When did you get the new TV? And the couch?" The room went silent for a fraction of a second. I saw Dustin, my brother, look up from his phone in the corner. He did not get up to greet me. He just gave a vague wave, his eyes darting to Marla. "Oh, the TV," Marla said quickly, her voice pitching up an octave. "Can you believe it? My friend Sheila. You remember Sheila? Her son works at an electronics store, and they were throwing out display models. She managed to snag one for me for free. It has a scratch on the back, but you cannot even see it." "And the couch?" I asked, walking over to run my hand along the velvet. It was soft. It was brand new. "Did Sheila give you this too?" "Thrift store," Brielle chimed in, too fast. $50. I spent all weekend scrubbing it. Good as new, right?" "Amazing," I said. "You guys are so lucky." I sat down in the armchair, the only piece of furniture I recognized. I watched them relax. They thought I bought it. They thought the Gullible Faith program was still running perfectly. We moved to the dining table. Dinner was roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and glazed carrots. It was a comfort meal, designed to disarm. As we ate, the conversation shifted from the weather to the inevitable topic of hardship. It was a dance they knew the steps to by heart. "So," Brielle started, pushing a carrot around her plate, "school is getting crazy. My professors are demanding these specific digital textbooks. They are proprietary, so I cannot buy them used. The whole bundle is nearly $600. I nodded sympathetically. taking a sip of water. That sounds incredibly unfair. Education is so expensive these days. I know, Brielle sighed, glancing at Marla. I do not know how I'm going to swing it. I might have to drop a class. And my job is a nightmare, Dustin grunted, speaking with his mouth full. They cut my hours again. I am down to 15 hours a week. I barely made enough to cover gas to get there. I am thinking of quitting and looking for something else. But in this economy, it is brutal. It is hard for everyone, Marla added, shaking her head. The price of groceries is up. The utility companies are gouging us. I got a notice that the electric bill is going to be double this month because of some grid maintenance fee. I honestly do not know how we are going to keep the lights on. Faith. I chewed my chicken slowly. It was dry. That sounds really stressful, I said, keeping my voice even. I am sorry you guys are dealing with all that. It keeps me up at night, Marla said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. But we have each other, right? That is what matters. Right, I said. We have each other. I let them talk. I let them pile on the misery. Brielle needed tires. Dustin needed a certification course. Marla needed dental work. The total they were hinting at hovered somewhere around $2,000. I just nodded. I did not offer to pay. Not yet. I wanted them to feel secure in their narrative. I need to use the restroom, I said after 20 minutes of listening to their fabricated poverty. I stood up and walked down the hallway. The bathroom was on the left, but the small console table where Marla kept the mail was on the right. It was a chaotic pile of envelopes and flyers. I knew Marla's habits. She never opened mail immediately unless it looked like a check. I paused, glancing back at the dining room. They were laughing. The tone had shifted instantly from somber desperation to light-hearted gossip the moment I left the table. I flipped through the stack of mail quickly. Junk, coupon, and then I saw it. A letter from the bank, addressed to Marla. But it was already opened. It was a credit card statement. I pulled the paper out halfway. My eyes scanned the transaction list. Date, February 3rd. Merchant, Best Buy. Amount, $1,200. Item, Sony 75-inch 4K TV. Date, February 4th. Merchant, Rooms to Go. Amount, $800. Item, Sectional Deposit. There was no Sheila. There was no thrift store find. They had bought the furniture on credit less than a week ago, and now they were setting up the Faith bailout to pay off the card before the interest hit. And underneath that statement was another envelope. It was from the water company. I peeked inside. Current balance, $42. There was no surcharge. There was no crisis. My hands shook. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline of confirmation. I shoved the papers back into the pile, ensuring they looked undisturbed. I flushed the toilet to keep up the ruse and washed my hands. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were hard. The sister they knew was gone. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I opened the voice recorder app. I checked the volume settings. I walked back into the dining room. The laughter died down as I approached, replaced instantly by the somber masks of financial struggle. "Everything okay, honey?" Marla asked. "Yeah," I said, sitting back down. "Just a headache." I placed my phone on the table, face down, the microphone pointed toward them. I had already hit record. "So," I said, leaning forward and looking at Dustin, "tell me more about this surcharge on the electric bill. How much did you say it was again?" Dustin blinked, surprised that I was asking for details. Usually, I just asked for the total. Yeah, he stammered, looking at Marla for cues. "It is like a grid maintenance fee. They said it is going to be an extra $300 this month, maybe more." $300, I repeated. "That is a lot. And Brielle, the textbooks, $600? $650, Brielle corrected, seizing the opportunity. "And I need them by Tuesday. And Mom," I turned to Marla, "you mentioned the dental work?" "My crown cracked," Marla sighed, touching her cheek. "Doctor, Evan said it will be $800 out of pocket." "Okay," I said softly. "I just want to make sure I have all the numbers right. You are such a blessing. Faith, Marla said, reaching for the wine bottle. I do not know why God gave me such a good daughter, but I thank him every day. I watched the red light of the recording app pulse in my mind. Even though the phone screen was dark, I had them. I had the lies, I had the specific amounts, and I had the physical evidence in the hallway to prove every single word was a fabrication. I will look at my accounts tonight, I said. Take your time, Dustin said, suddenly cheerful. Pass the potatoes? I passed the potatoes. I watched them eat. I watched them celebrate the victory they thought they had just won. They had no idea that the phone sitting between the salt and pepper shakers was not just a device, it was a gavel, and I was about to bring it down. The dinner plates were cleared, but the heaviness in the room remained. It settled over the table like a fog, thick with expectation. Marla wiped the corner of her mouth with a napkin, her eyes fixed on me with that familiar, predatory warmth. I knew the preamble was over. It was time for the main event. Faith, honey, Marla began, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. About next month, I was looking at the projections for the utility costs. With winter coming, the heating bill is going to be astronomical. I am terrified we might get cut off if we do not put down a significant deposit. I watched her hands. She was wringing them together. A gesture of anxiety she had perfected over the years. It was a performance. I had seen her use the same gesture when she wanted a new patio set 2 years ago. How much are we talking? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Probably another $400 on top of the usual, Marla said, exhaling sharply. Just to be safe, you know I hate asking, but I do not want the house to freeze. Brielle leaned in, resting her chin on her hand, her eyes wide and glistening. We know how hard you work. Faith, honestly, we talk about it all the time. I know you love this family more than anything. It is the only reason we feel safe enough to ask. The words were sweet, but the intent was surgical. She was using my affection as a weapon, carving out a space where saying no would equal saying I do not love you. It was a trap I had walked into willingly for a decade. Today, however, I just took a sip of water. Speaking of safety, I said, setting the glass down with a deliberate click. How was your trip to Charleston last weekend? Brielle, I saw some photos of the hotel. It looked beautiful. The air in the room shifted instantly. Brielle froze. Her eyes darted to Marla and then back to me. I saw the panic flare behind her pupils. She had blocked me from seeing her stories on Instagram, but she had forgotten that her best friend's profile was public, and her best friend tagged everyone. Charleston? Brielle stammered, her laugh sounding brittle. Oh, that. I did not really go. I just tagged along with a friend who was driving down. We stayed at her aunt's house. I slept on a couch. It was actually super uncomfortable. I barely spent a dime. I nodded slowly, acting as if I believed her. I knew for a fact the aunt's house was the Ritz-Carlton, and the couch was a king-size suite with an ocean view. The timestamp on the photos matched the weekend she claimed she was too broke to buy groceries. That is good, I said. I am glad you are being frugal. I turned my head toward Dustin. He was busy picking at a loose thread on the tablecloth, trying to make himself invisible. And Dustin, I said, my voice pleasant, I noticed the watch you are wearing. Is that the new Apple Watch Ultra? I have been looking at that one. It retails for about $800, right? Dustin instinctively covered his wrist with his other hand, pulling his sleeve down. His face flushed a deep, blotchy red. What? This? He laughed nervously. No way. It is a knockoff. I got it online for like $40. It barely even works. The screen glitches all the time. Really? I asked, tilting my head. It looks remarkably sharp for a $40 knockoff. Even the band looks like the authentic titanium loop. It is just a good replica, Dustin insisted, his voice rising in defense. You know I cannot afford the real thing. Faith, why would you even think that? Marla sensed the ground slipping. She slammed her hand down on the table. Not hard enough to break anything, but hard enough to demand silence. "Faith," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured hurt. "Why are you grilling your brother and sister? They are struggling. We are all struggling. Do you think we enjoy living like this? Begging for scraps?" She took a deep breath, her eyes welling up with tears that I suspected she could summon on command. "I sacrificed everything for you kids," Marla continued, playing her trump card. "When your father died, I worked 2 jobs. I went without new clothes for 5 years, so you could have school supplies. I gave up my life so you could have yours. And now, when the family needs a little help, you sit there and interrogate us about watches and road trips?" It was a masterclass in deflection. She was shifting the battlefield from logic to emotion, trying to drown my questions in a sea of guilt. In the past, this would have worked. I would have apologized. I would have written the check just to make her stop crying. But I was not listening with my heart anymore. I was listening with my ears, and the recording app on my phone was listening with its microphone. I waited for her to finish. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the sound of Brielle sniffling. "I am not interrogating anyone, Mom," I said calmly. "I appreciate everything you have done. I really do." "Then you will help us with the electricity and the books?" Marla asked, drying her eyes instantly. "I can tell the company to expect the payment tomorrow?" I looked at each of them. Brielle, the manipulator, Dustin, the liar, Marla, the architect. "I will have to check my numbers," I said. The sentence hung in the air like a lead balloon. Marla blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said I will have to check my numbers," I repeated, my voice steady. "I have some financial restructuring of my own going on. I cannot transfer anything tonight. I need to review my budget, look at my liquidity, and see what is feasible. I will get back to you." They stared at me as if I had started speaking a foreign language. Review? Feasible? These were not words I used with them. I usually just use the word yes. "Restructuring?" Dustin scoffed. "You make 6 figures. Faith, what is there to restructure? It is just a few $100. "It is never just a few $100. Dustin," I said softly. Brielle's face hardened. The mask of the sweet, struggling student dropped, revealing the spoiled, entitled woman underneath. She crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. "You do not believe us," she spat out. "That is it, isn't it? You think we are lying to you. You think we are trying to scam you." "I did not say that," I replied. "You did not have to," Brielle snapped. "You are looking at us like we are criminals. After everything we do for you, we are your family. Faith, you are supposed to trust us blindly." "Trust, but verify," I said, a quote I used at work often. "That is insulting," Marla said, her voice turning cold. "If you do not want to help, just say you do not want to help. Do not sit there and judge us." I stood up. Picking up my purse, I left the phone on the table for 1 second longer, capturing the sound of their indignation, before sliding it into my pocket. "I am not judging," I said, offering them a small, tight smile that did not reach my eyes. "I just want to make sure that if I help, I do it properly. I want to make sure the money goes exactly where it is needed." The word properly seemed to echo in the dining room. It sounded like a threat. They exchanged glances, nervous, irritated glances. They realized that the ATM had developed a glitch. They did not know yet that the machine was not broken. It was simply under new management. "I am tired," I said, turning toward the door. "I will email you later in the week once I have assessed everything." "Email us?" Marla asked, incredulous. "You are my daughter, not my accountant." "Right now," I said, opening the front door and letting the humid night air rush in. "I think I need to be a little bit of both." I walked out before they could argue further. I did not slam the door. I closed it gently, with the finality of a vault locking shut. Behind me, the house was silent. They were confused. They were angry, but they were also afraid. And for the first time in 4 years, I was not. I drove home from my mother's house with the silence of the car wrapping around me like a shield. My hands were steady on the wheel. The trembling I had felt earlier in the evening, the sheer physical reaction to lying to the people who raised me, had evaporated. In its place was a cold, humming efficiency. I was no longer a daughter navigating a complex family dynamic. I was a crisis manager executing a hostile takeover of my own life. When I walked into my apartment, I did not turn on the TV. I did not pour a glass of wine. I went straight to my desk and opened my laptop. The blue light of the screen washed over my face as I began the digital purge. First came the passwords. I had used the same variation of passwords for a decade. Usually some combination of my childhood street name and my birth year. It was sentimental, easy to remember, and terrifyingly easy for anyone who knew me to guess. I went through every single account: banking, email, social media, utilities, insurance. I changed them all to randomized strings of 20 characters generated by a security app. I enabled two-factor authentication on everything, linking the codes to an authenticator app rather than my phone number, just in case they tried to SIM swap me or access my messages. Then came the financial firewall. I opened a new checking account with a completely different bank, one that had no physical branches near my mother's house. I initiated the paperwork to redirect my entire paycheck to this new vault. I left the old account active but empty, a hollow shell for them to find if they ever tried to pry. But as I dug deeper into the architecture of my financial life, I found rot I had not expected. I pulled up my credit report. I had always glanced at the score, which was excellent, but I had rarely scrutinized the open trade lines. I expanded the details for a cable and internet provider. The account was in my name, that part I knew, but the billing address listed was not my apartment. It was my mother's house. I stared at the screen. For 3 years, the physical bills had been going to her mailbox. I had never seen a paper statement because they made sure to intercept them. I had just been receiving the amount due notification via email, a number I paid without question. By controlling the mailbox, they controlled the narrative. If the rates hiked, I wouldn't see the breakdown. If they ordered pay-per-view movies or upgraded the sports package, I wouldn't see the line items. I would just see a total and assume it was the cost of keeping the lights on. It was a paper chain, invisible and choking. I picked up my phone. It was late, but the 24-hour customer service lines were open. "Thank you for calling Simplified Cable," the automated voice chirped. I spent the next 3 hours on the phone. It was a tedious, infuriating marathon of hold music and verification questions. "Yes, my name is Faith Crawford," I told the representative for the power company. "I am looking at an account for 42 Oak Creek Drive. Yes, that is the one. I need to know if I am the primary account holder. You are listed as the responsible party." "Ma'am," the voice said. "Okay," I said, my voice flat. "I need to schedule a service disconnection." "Disconnection?" The rep sounded confused. "Is there a move scheduled?" "Effectively," I said. "I am removing my financial liability from this address. I want to schedule the shutoff for the last day of this billing cycle. That is exactly 14 days from now." "We can transfer the service to another party if they call in," the rep suggested helpfully. "They can call in if they want," I said. "But as of the 14th, I am closing this account. Please send the final confirmation number to my email." I did this for the water. I did this for the gas. I did this for the internet. I systematically dismantled the infrastructure of their comfort. I did not turn off the power today. That would be petty, and it would give them ammunition to call me cruel. I set the date for 2 weeks out. That gave them a full billing cycle of notice, if they bothered to open the mail I was about to have sent to them. By 3 a.m, my name was pending removal from 5 different service providers. I felt lighter, as if I had physically shed a heavy winter coat I had been wearing in the middle of July. I turned back to the exit strategy folder on my desktop. I created a subfolder named Evidence. I dragged the audio files from dinner into it. I added the screenshots of Brielle's Charleston trip and Marla's spa day. I downloaded the PDF statements from the bank showing the furniture purchases. I organized them chronologically. It looked like a case file for a fraud investigation. In a way, it was. Then, I did the hardest thing yet. I picked up my phone and opened the family group chat. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard. I needed them to relax. I needed them to think the glitch at dinner was just a momentary lapse in my programming. If they suspected I was cutting them off, they would swarm. They would guilt trip. They would show up at my office. They would create an emergency so big I would be forced to open my wallet before I was ready. I needed a decoy. "Hey everyone," I typed. "Sorry I was weird at dinner. Work stress has been crazy and I have a migraine. Do not worry about the bills. I'm just moving some funds around to get better interest rates. I will handle the transfers on the first of the month as usual. Love you." I read it back. It tasted like ash in my mouth. It was a lie, but it was a necessary one. It was the sedative before the surgery. I hit send. Almost immediately. The reactions poured in. Heart emojis from Brielle. Thanks, sis, you are the best, from Dustin. A gif of a praying angel from Marla. They bought it. They were so arrogant in their control over me that they could not conceive of a world where I actually followed through on a threat. They thought my resistance was just a tantrum, something to be managed with a little patience and a lot of emotional manipulation. I closed the chat and silenced the notifications. The next day at work, I pulled Nina into a quiet conference room. I looked like a ghost, pale and dark-eyed, but Nina smiled when she saw the grim set of my jaw. "I did it," I told her. "I moved the money. I scheduled the shutoffs. The deadline is the 14th. "The 14th," Nina repeated, looking at the calendar on the wall. "That is D-Day." I sent them a text saying everything is normal, I added. "They think I am paying." Nina nodded approvingly. "Good. Let them sleep. But listen to me. Faith, you need to be ready for what happens when they wake up." "I know," I said. "They will be angry." "No," Nina said, her expression turning serious. "Anger is what happens when you forget a birthday. This is an extinction burst. When you cut off a supply source, the parasite does not just detach and swim away. It digs in deeper. It releases toxins. They will not just beg. Faith, they will attack. They will try to destroy your reputation. They will call your boss. They will tell your extended family you are on drugs or having a breakdown. They will weaponize everything they know about you." "I have the dossier," I said, tapping my bag. "I have proof of where the money went." "Keep it close," Nina warned, "and do not engage. When the 14th hits, you go dark, no explanations, no apologies. You let the silence do the screaming for you." "I am ready," I said, and I was. I had spent my whole life fearing their disapproval, terrified that if I stopped paying, they would stop loving me. But looking at the calendar, seeing the date circled in red, I realized the truth. They had never loved me. They had loved the lifestyle I provided. The 14th was coming, and for the first time in years, the bill was going to be sent to the right address. The 14th of the month arrived with the silence of a held breath. Usually, this was the day my bank account would hemorrhage. By 7 in the morning, I would have typically transferred 3 distinct sums to 3 different accounts, followed by a series of confirmation texts to ensure everyone felt secure. Today, the only thing I transferred was my coffee from the pot to my mug. I sat at my kitchen counter, watching the sun rise over the city skyline. My phone lay on the marble surface. Face up, I had turned off the ringer, but I had left the screen notifications on. I wanted to see it. I wanted to watch the panic unfold in real time, like a controlled demolition. The first tremor hit at 6:15 in the morning. It was a text from Brielle. "Morning, sis? Just checking on the electric transfer. I think the app is glitching because I do not see it yet. Let me know when you send it so I can pay before the late fee hits. Love you." It was casual. It was breezy. It was the text of someone who believed the world revolved around her convenience. I took a sip of my coffee and swiped the notification away. I did not reply. I did not log into my banking app. I simply finished my breakfast, rinsed my cup, and drove to work. By the time I settled into my desk at the office, the tremors had turned into a quake. At 9:40, my phone lit up. It was Marla. I let it vibrate against the mahogany desk. It buzzed for 30 seconds, then stopped. 2 minutes later, it buzzed again, and again. I watched the screen. Missed call. Mom. Missed call. Mom. Voicemail. Mom. I put on my headphones and opened a spreadsheet. I did not listen to the voicemail yet. I knew exactly what it would say. It would start with feigned concern. Faith, are you okay? Are you in the hospital? And it would end with the real point. Where is the money? By 11 o'clock. The tone had shifted. The texts were no longer polite inquiries. They were demands. Marla. Faith, pick up the phone. This is not funny. The bill is due today. Marla. Are you ignoring me? After everything I do for you? I worked through lunch. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like I was watching a weather radar tracking a storm that could not touch me. I was safe inside the fortress of my own boundaries. At 1 in the afternoon, Dustin entered the chat. His approach was less subtle. Dustin, Mom is freaking out. She says you are ghosting us. What is your problem? You are going to get the power cut off. You are destroying this family over a couple of $100. Destroying the family. That was their favorite phrase. As if the structural integrity of our bloodline depended entirely on my willingness to finance their cable package. I took a screenshot of the text. I dragged it into the folder marked Evidence. By late afternoon, they had switched tactics. The aggression had not worked, so they deployed the nuclear option. Tragedy. At 4:30, Brielle sent a picture of Marla lying on the sofa with a damp cloth on her forehead. The lighting was dramatic. The caption read, Mom is shaking. Her blood pressure is through the roof because she is so stressed about the bills. I do not know what to do. If she has a stroke, it is on you. Faith. I looked at the photo closely. Marla was wearing the same diamond earrings she had worn to dinner on Sunday. Her stress looked suspiciously like a nap. I did not reply. The sun went down, and the barrage continued. They were throwing everything at the wall to see what would stick. Guilt, anger, fear, shame. Marla, I cannot believe I raised a daughter who would leave her mother in the dark. It is cold in here. Faith, it was 65 degrees outside. I drove home in silence. I made dinner. I read a book. For the first time in 4 years, I did not spend my evening soothing their anxieties. I spent it reclaiming my own peace. Day 2 broke with a violence I had anticipated. If day 1 was about panic, day 2 was about rage. They realized I was not dead, and I was not in the hospital. I was simply choosing not to pay. And that choice was, in their eyes, a declaration of war. The messages started early, and they were vicious. The pretense of love had evaporated, leaving only the ugly, entitled core of their dependency. Dustin, you are a selfish bitch. You think you are better than us because you have a fancy job? You are nothing without this family. Brielle, I hope you are happy. I cannot study because I'm so upset. You are ruining my future. Marla, who is poisoning you against us? Is it that friend of yours? Nina? She is jealous of how close we are. Do not listen to her. You are betraying your father's memory. That one stung. Bringing my father into it was a low blow, even for Marla, but I did not react. I did not type back a furious defense. I let them type. I let them fill the silence with their own toxicity. Every insult, every threat, every manipulation was another line of data in my report. I watched the curve of their behavior. It was following the classic extinction burst pattern perfectly. First, they demanded the reward. Then, they tried to perform the behavior that usually yielded the reward. Guilt. When that failed, they attacked the source. By the afternoon of the second day, they had moved on to threats of public humiliation. Marla. If you do not transfer the money by 5, I am calling your Aunt Linda. I will tell her how you are treating me. Dustin. Maybe I should come down to your office and ask your boss if he knows he employs someone who abuses their elderly mother. I saved that one immediately. A threat to my employment was a crossed line that moved this from a family dispute to a legal matter. I stayed silent. I let them scream into the void. By the morning of the third day, the energy had shifted again. The rage had burned itself out, replaced by a confused, desperate bargaining. They were disoriented. The silent treatment was a weapon they had used on me for years, but they had no immunity to it when it was turned against them. My phone rang at 10 in the morning. It was Brielle. I looked at it. I had enough evidence. I had pages of text messages, voicemails, and threats. I had the proof that their need was actually entitlement, and their love was conditional on my compliance. I slid my finger across the screen and answered. Hello? My voice was cool, professional. Faith. Brielle screamed, her voice cracking. Oh my God, finally! Are you crazy? Why are you doing this? Mom is a wreck. We have been trying to reach you for 3 days. I have been busy, I said. Busy? You have been busy while we are starving? Brielle sobbed, but it sounded forced. Just send the money. Faith, please, we can forget this whole thing happened. Just transfer the funds, and we will forgive you. We will forgive you. The audacity was almost impressive. I am not transferring anything, I said. What? Brielle's voice dropped. What do you mean? I mean we need to talk, I said. Not over the phone, in person. Fine, Brielle said, sounding relieved. Come over tonight. Mom is making pot roast. No, I said. Tomorrow, 6 o'clock, at Mom's house, all of you. Why tomorrow? Because I want this done face to face, I said. If anyone isn't there at 6, I leave, and you don't get another chance to talk to me. My hands were not shaking. My heart was not racing. I felt a clarity that was sharp and cold like a diamond. I looked at the folder on my computer screen. Exit strategy. It was time to present the findings. I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and prepared for the final board meeting of the Crawford family. The phone in my hand felt heavy, not with the weight of the device itself, but with the gravity of what I was about to do. For 3 days, I had let them scream into the void. I had watched their messages degrade from entitlement to panic, and finally, to a desperate, clawing rage. Now, the silence was mine to break. I was not calling to negotiate. I was calling to dictate the terms of their surrender. It was late afternoon on the third day. The sun was casting long, sharp shadows across my living room floor, cutting the space into sections of light and dark. I liked the metaphor. There were no gray areas left in my life. There was only what was true and what was a lie. I dialed Brielle's number. She answered on the first ring, breathless, as if she had been staring at the screen praying for my name to appear. Faith? She gasped. Oh, thank God. Faith, are you okay? We were so worried. Did you get my texts? The power company sent a final notice. We have until tomorrow morning. Her voice was a frantic rush of words. Stumbling over each other in a race to get to the request, she did not ask how I was. She did not ask why I had been silent. She only checked the status of the transaction. I am fine. Brielle, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. It was calm. It was devoid of the anxious warmth I usually projected to make them feel comfortable. It was the voice of a stranger. Okay, good. That is good, Brielle stammered, clearly thrown off by my tone. So, can you send the transfer now? The app says it is instant. So if you do it right now, I can pay it online before 5. No, I said. The word hung in the air between us. Simple and absolute. What? Brielle let out a nervous laugh. What do you mean? No. Faith, this is not a joke. They are going to cut the lights. The food in the fridge will spoil. Mom is literally crying in the kitchen right now. I am not transferring any money, I said, speaking slowly, enunciating every syllable. Tomorrow evening, 6 o'clock, I am coming over to the house. We are going to have a conversation. We are going to talk about everything clearly. I could hear the gears grinding in her head. She did not want a conversation. A conversation meant accountability. A conversation meant looking me in the eye. She wanted the digital magic of a bank notification, the invisible solving of problems she refused to understand. We do not need to talk. Brielle's voice pitched up into a shriek. Why do we need to talk? There is nothing to talk about. Just transfer the money. Faith, you can come over whenever you want. Just pay the bill first. Why are you being like this? No, I repeated. 6 o'clock, tomorrow. You are being psycho, she yelled. You are holding us hostage over a stupid bill. Then, there was a scuffling sound on the other end of the line. I heard muffled voices, the sharp intake of breath, and then the phone was snatched away. Faith Crawford. It was Marla, my mother. Her voice was low and trembling with a mixture of fury and disbelief. It was the voice she used when I was a child and had broken a vase. It was the voice of authority, designed to make me shrink, to make me apologize, to make me beg for her approval. Mom, I said. I did not shrink. What is this game you are playing? Marla demanded. Your sister is hysterical. You have ignored your mother for 3 days. You have left us sitting here in the dark, wondering if you were dead in a ditch, and now you call and say you want to talk? What is wrong with you? There is no game, I said, leaning back against my kitchen counter. I am just done playing the one you started. Excuse me? Marla snapped. I do not know who you think you are talking to. Young lady, I am your mother. I wiped your nose. I put a roof over your head. And I have been keeping that roof over your head for 4 years, I said. How dare you, she hissed. You are ungrateful. That is what you are. You are a selfish, ungrateful child. After everything I sacrificed for you, after I gave up my life so you could go to school and get that fancy job, you think you are better than us now? You think because you have a little money you can treat your family like dirt? The word ungrateful hit me, but it did not hurt. It bounced off the armor I had forged over the last 72 hours. It was a fascinating word choice. It was the last refuge of a parent who had nothing left to leverage but guilt. I am not ungrateful. Mom, I said, my voice dropping to a register that was almost a whisper, yet it carried more weight than her shouting. I am simply looking at the truth. I am reviewing the facts. The truth? Marla scoffed. The truth is that you have abandoned your family when we needed you most. You are letting your brother and sister suffer because you are on some kind of power trip. No, I said. The truth is simpler than that. I took a breath. This was it. The moment I had prepared for. The moment I had dreaded and craved in equal measure. I have paid every single bill for that house for 4 years, I said. The mortgage assistance, the electricity, the water, the internet, the cars, the insurance, the vacations you pretended were cheap, the clothes you said were thrifted. I have paid for it all. Faith, stop it, Marla warned, her voice wavering slightly. I have the receipts, Mom, I said. I have every bank statement. I have every text message where you asked for money for emergencies that never happened. I have the photos of the spa trips you took with the money I sent for roof repairs. I have the credit card statements for the giant television you bought while claiming you were starving. Silence. It was not the silence of an empty room. It was the silence of a vacuum. A sudden, violent absence of air. It was the sound of a narrative collapsing. For years, they had operated under the assumption that I was blind. They thought I was the foolish, benevolent cash cow who gave milk without asking where it went. They never imagined that I was keeping score. Faith, Marla whispered. The authority was gone. The power voice had cracked. All that was left was the thin, reedy sound of a woman who had been caught. I have the receipts, I repeated. And tomorrow at 6 o'clock, I am bringing them with me. Wait, she said. Faith, listen. I am done listening, God, I said. I am coming to close the account. I pulled the phone away from my ear. I did not wait for her to spin a new lie. I did not wait for the tears. I did not wait for the gaslighting. I pressed the red button and ended the call. The room was quiet again, but the shadows had moved. The sun was setting, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red. I placed the phone down on the counter. My hand was steady. I walked over to the dining table where my folder lay. Exit strategy. It was thick with paper. It was heavy with proof. I ran my hand over the cover. Tomorrow. I would not be walking into that house as a daughter seeking love. I would be walking in as a judge delivering a verdict. I went to my closet and chose my outfit for the next day. I picked a tailored black blazer, crisp trousers, and heels that clicked sharply against the floor. I would not wear the soft, comfortable clothes I usually wore to family dinners. I would wear my armor. I would dress like the financial executioner they had forced me to become. They wanted a bill payer? Fine. Tomorrow. They would get the final invoice, and the cost would be higher than they could ever afford. I arrived at 5:45. I did not park in the driveway. I parked 3 houses down, under the shade of a large oak tree that was just beginning to shed its leaves. I needed the walk. I needed the physical act of approaching the house to feel like a choice, not a habit. I turned off the engine and sat in the silence of my car for a moment, listening to the cooling tick of the metal. My heart was beating with a slow, heavy rhythm, not out of fear, but out of a strange, cold anticipation. It felt less like I was visiting family and more like I was scrubbing in for emergency surgery. I checked my reflection in the visor mirror. My face was pale, composed, and utterly unreadable. I looked like a stranger. I reached over to the passenger seat and picked up my leather satchel. It was heavy. Inside, it did not contain gifts or groceries. It contained a black binder, 2 inches thick, organized with colorful tabs, the exit strategy file. But tucked into the back pocket of the binder was something else. Something they did not know existed. A stack of 3 envelopes, each one containing a confirmation letter from the utility companies, the internet provider, and the insurance agency. These letters confirmed that as of tomorrow, my name was no longer attached to this address. I stepped out of the car and locked it. The sound of the beep echoed in the quiet suburban street. As I walked toward the house, I noticed the grass. It was perfectly green, lush and trimmed. I paid $150 a month for that lawn. I looked at the roof. I had paid $4,000 to fix a leak that I now suspected never existed. I was walking toward a monument built on my own exploitation. I did not knock. I still had my key. A heavy brass thing that felt cold in my palm. I slid it into the lock and turned. The click was loud. I pushed the door open and stepped into the foyer. The house was dim. The curtains were drawn, blocking out the evening sun, creating an artificial twilight that smelled of stale air and tension. They were waiting for me in the living room. It was a tableau so perfectly staged it almost made me laugh. Marla was sitting in the center of the new velvet sofa, clutching a tissue. She was not wearing her usual jewelry. She was wearing an old, faded cardigan I hadn't seen in years, one that made her look smaller, frailer. Her face was washed of makeup, leaving her looking gray and tired. It was the mother of sorrows look, designed to trigger an immediate protective reflex in me. To her left sat Brielle. She was curled up in a ball, hugging her knees. Her mascara was smeared beneath her eyes in dark, jagged streaks, evidence of a crying session that had conveniently paused for my arrival. She looked up at me with wide, red-rimmed eyes, vibrating with a performance of anxiety that deserved an award. And standing behind them, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed over his chest, was Dustin. He was wearing a tight t-shirt, his jaw set, his eyes hard. He was the muscle. He was there to loom, to remind me that I was outnumbered, to physically block the exit if guilt didn't work. "You are here," Marla said. Her voice was a rasp, weak and trembling. I did not say hello. I walked into the room, my heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. I stopped at the coffee table. In the center of the table, clearing a space among the decorative candles, was a single sheet of paper. It was placed there like an altar offering. I looked down at it, It was a final notice from the electric company. It was printed on standard printer paper, the kind you buy at the grocery store. The logo at the top looked pixelated, as if it had been copied and pasted from a low-resolution image. The font was generic Times New Roman, but it was the numbers that caught my eye. Total amount due, $850. Immediate payment required to avoid disconnection. I stared at it. I knew for a fact, because I had called the company 3 days ago, that the actual bill was $142. They had inflated the crisis by 600%. They weren't just asking for help. They were skimming off the top. Marla followed my gaze to the paper. She let out a shuddering breath. "We have until tomorrow morning." "Faith," she whispered. "They said they are coming at 8 o'clock to cut the line. Are you really going to let your family sit in the dark? Are you going to let us be thrown out on the street?" It was the opening line of the script. "Are you going to let us suffer?" It was designed to bypass logic and strike directly at my conscience. I looked at her. I looked at the fake paper. I looked at Brielle's artfully smudged eyes. I looked at Dustin's aggressive stance. For the first time in my life, I felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no panic, no urge to fix it. I just felt a profound, exhausting clarity. I did not answer her question. I did not apologize for being late. I did not ask how they were. I swung my leather bag around and set it down on the armchair. I unzipped it. The sound of the zipper was loud in the quiet room. I pulled out the black binder. It was heavy, dense with paper. I walked over to the coffee table. I picked up their fake notice with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated, and moved it to the side. Then, I placed my binder in the center of the table. Thud. The sound of the heavy binder hitting the wood was solid. It was the sound of a gavel striking a bench. The room went still. Dustin shifted his weight, his arms dropping slightly. Brielle stopped rocking back and forth. Marla frowned, her eyes darting from the binder to my face. "What is that?" Dustin asked, his voice rough. I placed my hand on the cover of the binder. "That," I said, my voice steady and cool, "is the audit." Brielle uncurled herself, sitting up straighter. "Faith, we do not have time for this. We do not need paperwork. We need the money transfer. Just do it so we can breathe." "Yeah," Dustin added, stepping forward. "Stop playing games. Mom is about to have a heart attack. Just pay the bill." "I am not paying the bill," I said. Marla sat up, the frail act slipping for a second. "Faith, how can you be so cruel?" "I am not paying the bill," I repeated, "because I have already paid it. I have paid it every month for 4 years, and I have paid for the surcharges that never existed, and I have paid for the emergency repairs that turned into spa days." Marla's face went white, not the pale of sickness, but the pale of shock. Brielle scrambled to her feet, her hands waving frantically. "What? That is crazy. You are listening to lies. I can explain." I held up a hand. I did not shout. I did not scream. I just held up my palm, flat and firm. "No," I said. Brielle froze, her mouth open. "I am not here to listen to explanations," I said. "I am not here to hear about your bad luck or your hard times. I have listened to that story for 1,460 days. I tapped the binder. "Tonight," I said, looking at each of them in turn, "you are going to listen to me." The air in the room seemed to solidify. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. They looked at me, and for the first time, they did not see their sister or their daughter. They did not see the ATM. They saw a stranger standing in their living room, a stranger who knew all their secrets and had brought the evidence to prove it. I opened the binder to the first page. The sound of the ring snapping open echoed like a gunshot. "Sit down, Brielle," I commanded, and to my absolute satisfaction, she sat. I did not begin with a speech. I did not begin with an accusation. I simply reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and set it on the table next to the black binder. I turned the volume all the way up. "I have something I want you to hear," I said. I pressed play. The silence of the living room was shattered by the tinny, undeniable sound of a jazz saxophone, followed immediately by the clink of expensive silverware. Then came the voices. They were clear, sharp, and devastatingly familiar. "She really is a bill-paying machine, isn't she?" Dustin's voice laughed from the speaker. I watched Dustin flinch as if he had been slapped. He looked at the phone, then at me, his mouth opening and closing in silent horror. "Let her work," Marla's voice crooned, dripping with condescension. "What else does she have? She has no husband. She has no children. Money is the only reason she is useful." Marla gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth, covering the lips that had spoken those words just a few nights ago. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the device as if it were a bomb counting down. "Tell her the water company raised their rates," Dustin's voice continued. "She never checks. She is so stupid when it comes to us." The recording ended. The silence that followed was not the heavy silence of before. It was the vacuum of total exposure. There was no way to spin this. There was no way to claim misunderstanding or context. They had been caught stripping me of my humanity for sport. "You tapped our phones?" Dustin whispered, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "No," I said, my voice calm, almost bored. Brielle pocket-dialed me. I listened for 10 minutes. I heard everything. The wine, the steak dinner you claimed you couldn't afford, and the plan to defraud me. I reached for the binder and flipped it open. I began to lay out the pages, one by one, forming a grid on the coffee table. "This," I said, pointing to the first column, "is a record of every transfer I have made to this family in 48 months. The total is $72,450. Marla made a choking sound. "And this," I pointed to the second column, "is the documented cost of the emergencies you claim to have. Notice the discrepancy? You asked for $1,200 for a car repair. The mechanic's invoice, which I obtained by calling the shop directly, was $300. You pocketed $900. "Faith, please," Brielle whimpered, tears streaming down her face, ruining the mascara she had applied so carefully. "We were just desperate. We didn't mean it like that." "And here's the most interesting part," I said, ignoring her. I pulled out a highlighted spreadsheet. "The double dip." I looked at Marla. She was trembling now, not with fake sorrow, but with real fear. "I noticed a pattern," I said. "Every month, on the 3rd, I get a text from one of you saying the internet bill is overdue and they are about to cut the line. I always transfer the money. But here's the thing. The internet bill is on auto-pay on my credit card. It has been for 3 years. I let that sink in. "For 3 years, I continued, you have been collecting cash from me to pay a bill that I had already paid. You weren't just asking for help. You were generating revenue off my ignorance. You turned my trust into a monthly subscription service." "We needed the money to live," Dustin shouted, trying to regain some ground. "You have a fancy job. You have savings. We have nothing." "You have nothing because you spend it on 75-inch televisions and trips to Charleston," I countered, dropping the photos of their luxuries onto the pile of financial ruin. "You do not have an income problem, Dustin. You have a character problem." I reached into the back pocket of the binder and pulled out the 3 white envelopes. I slid them across the table. They stopped right in front of Marla's shaking hands. "What is this?" Marla whispered. "Those are confirmation letters from the electric company, the water board, and the internet provider," I said. "As of midnight tonight, my name is removed from all accounts associated with this address. The autopay is canceled. The liability is transferred." Marla stared at the envelopes as if they contained anthrax. "Did you cut us off?" she stammered. "No," I said. "I liberated myself. If you want electricity tomorrow, you will need to call them and put down a deposit in your own name. If you want water, you will need to pay the balance. If you want internet to stream your shows on that new television, you will need to use your own credit card." "You cannot do this!" Marla screamed. Standing up, the mask of the frail mother was gone. replaced by the visage of a woman losing her kingdom. "I am your mother. You owe me. You cannot just leave us to rot." "I am not leaving you to rot," I said, standing up to meet her gaze. "I am leaving you to be adults." "You will regret this," Marla hissed, her eyes narrowing into slits. "You think you are so high and mighty, but walk out that door, and you will see. You will be alone. You have no one but us. You will be so lonely you will beg to come back." It was her final weapon, the threat of isolation. She thought my fear of being unloved was stronger than my self-respect. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized that the woman standing in front of me was a stranger. "Mom," I said, and my voice was soft, devoid of anger. "I have been lonely in this room for 20 years. I have been lonely every time I paid a bill to buy a conversation. I have been lonely every time you hugged me only to check my pockets." I picked up my purse. "I have been lonely for a long time," I said. The only difference is that today, I stopped paying the fee for that loneliness. Brielle lunged forward, grabbing my arm. "Faith, don't go. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. We'll pay you back. Just don't cut the power." I looked down at her hand on my sleeve. I gently but firmly peeled her fingers off. "It is not about the money, Brielle," I said. "It never was." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the brass key to the front door. I placed it on top of the pile of spreadsheets. It clinked against the wood with a finality that rang through the room. "I am changing my number tonight," I said. "If you have a genuine emergency, a medical one, with a doctor's note, you can email me. If you ask for money, I will block the email address. If you come to my office, I will call security. If you come to my apartment, I will call the police." "You are heartless," Dustin spat. "No," I said, turning my back on them. "I am just debt-free." I walked to the door. I did not look back. I heard Brielle sobbing, a raw, ugly sound of panic. I heard Marla cursing my name. I heard Dustin kick the coffee table. I opened the front door and stepped out. The evening air hit my face, cool and smelling of rain and asphalt. It was the sweetest thing I had ever inhaled. I walked down the driveway, past the manicured lawn I would no longer pay for, past the roof I would no longer repair. I reached my car and got in. I sat there for a moment in the quiet. My phone was in my pocket. It was silent. There were no demands. There were no crises. There was just the stillness of a life that finally belonged to me. I started the engine and drove away, leaving the house in the rearview mirror, shrinking smaller and smaller until it was nothing but a speck of dust in the distance. I did not turn on the radio. I just drove, listening to the hum of the tires on the road, driving toward a future where the only bills I paid were the ones with my name on them. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment down below where you are listening from. I would love to read your thoughts on how I handled this situation. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach more people who might need the courage to stand up for themselves.